August 1918, the Amiens offensive. A German non-commissioned officer, Paul Huber, lies pressed into a trench near Veretano, staring into a gray wall of morning fog. The battlefield is holding its breath. No shouting, no engines, just that unbearable quiet before the world breaks. Then it happens. A crack, a whistle, impact. Bullets come from the one direction no one expected, and they don't come like panic. They come like a measured sentence, not chaotic bursts, not random spraying. Each shot feels chosen, aimed, lethally precise. Huber's company starts dropping. Men don't fall screaming. They simply collapse, one by one, the kind of death that convinces you snipers are working. But after 30 minutes, the numbers don't lie. 19 men are gone. And the worst part isn't the loss, it's the confusion. Because these aren't snipers. These are Americans, ordinary infantrymen, moving forward behind cover, firing on the move, and hitting. Huber survives the war. He goes home. He lives a full life. But he never shakes the memory of that particular fear, the fear of an enemy whose method you can't understand. Because Huber knows what his own soldiers can do. Well-trained, disciplined men who might hit once out of 10 shots in the chaos of battle. And now he's watching Americans bring men down with 2, sometimes 3 shots, like they're on a range. Except this range is made of mud and fog and blood. Years later, after the war, the Germans finally get access to American training manuals. And what they find, what explains that foggy morning, shocks them more than tanks, aircraft, or gas ever did. Because the secret isn't a machine, it's a system. And this story is about that system, how training changes the outcome of a war, how habits formed in peacetime turn into an advantage when the shooting starts, and why the Germans didn't understand the American speed until they saw what had been drilled into them long before they ever stepped into a trench. When the United States entered the First World War in April 1917, the numbers were almost embarrassing. The American Army had about 130,000 regular soldiers. France had mobilized more than 8 million. Germany, approximately 13 million. Britain, around 5 million. America was a newcomer to a slaughterhouse that Europe had already been feeding for 3 years. Their troops had no experience of trench warfare. They didn't know the tactics of assaults under machine gun fire. They had only a vague idea of what the Western Front actually did to a human body. And yet, the Germans were the ones confused. Because the Americans arrived and began attacking with a speed that didn't match their lack of experience. Then they fired with an accuracy that didn't match the chaos of modern war. So what did they have that the Europeans didn't? Not secret weapons, not superior artillery, not revolutionary tactics. They had a tradition, a culture, almost a national habit: marksmanship. For decades, long before April 1917, America had been shaped by rifles in everyday life. From the Civil War, through campaigns in the West, through hunting seasons, rifle clubs, village competitions. This wasn't ceremonial military shooting. It was practical, routine, normal. Farmers fired often. Teenagers learned to hold a gun before they could write confidently. Weapons were tools of survival, not symbols of power. So when the U.S. Army began forming in 1917, it wasn't building riflemen from nothing. It was taking people who had already lived with a rifle and turning that familiarity into disciplined skill. There's a moment in July 1918 that reveals just how strange this looked to Europe. British General Douglas Haig met American Commander John Pershing. Their conversation turned to rifle fire effectiveness. Haig was genuinely surprised. His intelligence report said American infantry units were inflicting serious losses at ranges where British soldiers didn't even bother opening fire. Pershing's answer was simple: "Our boys learned to shoot before they ever put on a uniform." Then he handed Haig a document. Small Arms Firing Manual, 1913. But this wasn't just a booklet with diagrams and dry commands. It was a training philosophy built around one core idea. Every soldier is a rifleman, not just a weapon carrier, not just a man holding a gun, a rifleman. The Germans learned this later, far too late, when their attacks were already breaking against accurate, methodical, devastating fire. when they were losing up to 40% of their men before they even reached enemy positions. And when their officers began chasing the same desperate question across every report and casualty list, why? Why do these Americans, who should be inexperienced, shoot like this? And to understand the answer, you have to zoom in, not to generals and maps, but to one ordinary recruit arriving in the summer of 1917, a 21-year-old farmer from Kentucky, James Gardner. James Gardner arrived at Camp Shelby, Mississippi in August 1917. He was 21 years old, a farmer from Kentucky, sunburned hands, quiet confidence. On his first day, an instructor asked him a simple question. "Can you shoot?" Gardner nodded. He was holding his own Springfield Model 1903 rifle, the same type his father used to hunt deer. The instructor followed up. "How many times have you fired a gun before?" Gardner paused, genuinely confused by the question. "Every day, sir," he finally answered, "since I turned 7. This wasn't a colorful anecdote. It was the norm. According to the United States War Department, roughly 63% of draftees from rural areas already had experience handling firearms before they ever put on a uniform. Many hunted. Others competed in local shooting matches. The rifle was part of everyday life, like an axe, a plow, or a hammer. This gave the American army something European armies didn't have: a foundation. In Britain, France, and Germany, most conscripts saw a rifle for the first time in the barracks. They had to be taught everything from scratch: how to hold the weapon, how to aim, how to control recoil. The Americans didn't. They only needed to systematize what already existed and turn habit into discipline. The Springfield Model 1903 was perfect for this role. Based on the German Mauser 98, it had a 5-round magazine, was chambered in 30.06, and had an effective sighting range of up to 800 meters. Simple, reliable, accurate. But the weapon itself decided nothing. Training decided everything. In September 1917, an officer at Quantico, Captain William McNair, decided to test this theory. He assembled 2 companies of recruits. One was made up largely of farmers from the Midwest. The other, factory workers from industrial cities in the East. Same rifles, same instructors, same training time. After 6 weeks, they went to the range. Distance 300 meters. Target, a human silhouette. The results were impossible to ignore. The farmers hit the target 82% of the time. The workers, 41%. McNair's conclusion was blunt. The difference is not in talent. The difference is in habit. A man who has held a rifle since childhood doesn't think about mechanics. He feels the shot. This observation would become the backbone of the entire American system. Do not teach from zero. Develop what already exists. Do not break, polish. General John Pershing understood this instinctively. He disliked improvisation. He believed in systems, in structure, in discipline backed by practice. And when he read reports from Europe, reports describing men needing to shoot while advancing, under pressure, in chaos, he realized accuracy alone was no longer enough. Speed mattered. Calm under stress mattered. The ability to fire on the move mattered. So in June 1917, Pershing created a special commission. Veteran officers, range instructors, civilian shooting coaches from rifle clubs. Their task was simple, but audacious: to ensure that every American soldier shot better than any opponent. They worked for 3 months. The result was a new document. Rifle Training Manual, 1917. 214 pages. Not theory, but repetition. Not ideas, but drills tested on thousands of men. And soon those drills would face their first real test. Not on a range, but in a trench, in the dark, at 3 o'clock in the morning. The real test came sooner than anyone expected. October 26, 1917. Outskirts of Battles-les-Monts, in the Luneville sector of Lorraine. On paper, it was a quiet stretch of the front. The French called it a training sector, a place where newcomers slowly learned what war felt like, without major battles. At 3 a.m., the Germans decided to test the newcomers. About 30 German infantrymen slipped forward under cover of darkness. A standard trench raid. Fast, brutal, precise. Their objective was simple: capture a few prisoners, assess the quality of this new American enemy, and disappear back into the night. The first American to die was Private James B. Gresham, 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Division, 24 years old, from Indiana. He was killed in hand-to-hand combat in the suffocating narrowness of the trench. Two others followed him almost immediately, Private Thomas Enright and Corporal Merrill Hay, the first American dead on European soil. By every measure, the raid should have succeeded, but something went wrong. The Germans failed to take a single prisoner. The Americans fought back with a ferocity the raiders hadn't anticipated, and more importantly, with an accuracy that didn't fit the stereotype of untested troops. Later, German Lieutenant Kurt Weidemann, the officer who led the raid, wrote in his diary, "They shoot differently, not like the French, not like the British. They aim deliberately, even in the dark, even in panic." 3 of his men were wounded, all by single shots. Clean, professional, not the fire of novices. The note reached German headquarters. It was read, filed, and quietly dismissed. After all, one night meant nothing. Every army had lucky moments. But this wasn't luck. It was the first signal that the American training system worked. Not in theory, not on paper, but under the worst possible conditions. Darkness, confusion, fear. And that signal would soon become impossible to ignore. Because just 7 months later, the Germans would set a trap, one designed to humiliate the Americans in their first major attack. A small village, a weakened garrison, an easy victory. They named the place Cantigny, and they believed the Americans would break there. May 28, 1918. The village of Cantigny, about 100 kilometers north of Paris. This was supposed to be simple. On paper, almost insulting in its simplicity. A small village, a German garrison of roughly 250 men, a limited objective. But the simplicity was an illusion. The German command had deliberately weakened the defense. The plan was calculated and cold. Let the Americans take the village. Let them feel their first taste of success. Then smash them with a counterattack and destroy the unit on its newly captured ground. A lesson, a warning. At 6:45 a.m., American artillery opened fire. The preparation lasted exactly 1 hour. At 7:45, the infantry went forward. 3,400 American soldiers, moving in even waves, Springfield rifles ready. German machine guns opened fire from fortified positions. It was a textbook defense. Stop the enemy on the approaches, force him to go to ground, finish him with artillery. It had worked against the French, against the British, against everyone. But the Americans did not do what the Germans expected. They did not go to ground. They kept moving. They fired while advancing, methodically, deliberately, sprinting from cover to cover. German machine gunners began to fall, not from artillery, not from lucky bursts, from rifle bullets at 300 to 400 meters, while the Americans were still moving forward. Lieutenant George Marshall, later Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, watched it unfold and wrote, "I saw our soldiers firing during the attack without stopping, without panic. They aimed, fired, reloaded, and went forward again, as if on the training range." By 9 a.m., Cantigny was taken. American losses, 84 killed, 231 wounded. German losses, nearly 2/3 of the garrison. But this was only the beginning. The German command reacted immediately. Over the next 3 days, they launched 7 separate counterattacks, fresh units, artillery, gas. The objective never changed. Drive the Americans out and prove the Western Front was no place for beginners. Each time, the result was the same. The Americans held, not primarily with bayonets, not with machine guns, but with precise, concentrated rifle fire. On May 30th, German Captain Hans Schultz of the 82nd Reserve Regiment was captured. During interrogation, he admitted, "We did not understand. Every attack ended the same way. Our men began to fall, not from machine gun bursts, but from single, precise shots. They did not shoot blindly. They aimed." By May 31st, the Germans abandoned the effort. Cantigny remained in American hands. French General Philippe Pétain came personally to thank the 1st Division. "You shoot like snipers," he said. Pershing answered simply, "We trained them that way." And now the question had changed. Not whether American training worked, but how it worked so well. The answer lay not in heroics, but in repetition, in drills that looked boring, pointless, almost absurd, until the moment they were needed. The secret of the American advantage wasn't courage, it wasn't numbers, and it wasn't better weapons. It was process. The Rifle Training Manual of 1917 was divided into 12 chapters. Only the first 3 dealt with theory, weapon structure, basic ballistics, the optics of aiming. The remaining 9 chapters were nothing but practice, endless, repetitive, relentless practice. The first drill looked almost ridiculous. A soldier lay in firing position, brought his rifle onto a target, aligned the sights and did not fire. He held the position for 10 seconds. An instructor checked the alignment. If it was off, he did it again, and again, and again, 100 times a day, for an entire week. European instructors scoffed at it. Why waste a week just looking through a sight? But the result was undeniable. After 7 days, the soldier stopped thinking about aiming. The body took over. The hands found the angle. The eye found the point. The rifle settled naturally. The second drill was breathing. Soldiers were taught not to fire while holding their breath. That caused tension, not on the inhale, when the chest rises and the sight floats. They were trained to fire on the natural pause at the end of the exhale. 1 second, a moment of maximum stability. Again, hundreds of repetitions. No live ammunition, just muscle memory. Inhale, exhale, press, hold, until the body did it automatically, without conscious command. Then came the hardest drill of all, firing on the move. European armies trained soldiers to fire from fixed positions, but real combat wasn't static. So the Americans introduced what they called the combat run. A soldier sprinted to cover, stopped sharply, fired one aimed shot, stood, ran again. 15 seconds per cycle. 500 meters. At first, no one hit anything. Breathing was ragged. Hands shook. Heartbeats thundered in the ears. But after 2 weeks, something changed. Soldiers learned to control their bodies even when their lungs burned and adrenaline clouded their vision. Sergeant Instructor Thomas Johnson wrote home from Camp Travis, Texas. "These boys are going to be killing machines, not because they are cruel, but because they are efficient. When you fire 100 times a day, in rain, in heat, in full gear, it stops being a skill, it becomes part of you." By the autumn of 1917, the system was in full motion. Tens of thousands of recruits passed through the camps each week. Each fired at least 2,000 rounds in training. The cost was enormous, but Pershing never wavered. He repeated the same line to the War Department: "Ammunition is cheaper than lives." And soon the system would face its most brutal test yet. Not in a village, not in a raid, but in a forest that would become a slaughterhouse. Belleau Wood. June 6, 1918, Belleau Wood, near Château-Thierry. The German advance toward Paris was gaining momentum. After their breakthrough on the Aisne, the objective was clear: reach the Marne, force the river, and threaten Paris with a decisive blow. French units were falling back. British forces were tied down elsewhere. The only real reserve left in this sector was American. The United States 2nd Division, including the Marine Corps, was ordered to stop the advance. Belleau Wood was the worst possible place to do it. Dense forest, old growth, natural cover everywhere. Perfect terrain for a defender with superior numbers and artillery. The Germans had both. At 7 o'clock, the first attack began. 3 battalions, nearly 2,000 German infantrymen, emerged from the trees. The pattern was familiar: artillery preparation, then dense waves of infantry, machine guns on the flanks. The Americans did something unexpected. They waited. They let the Germans close the distance. Not to 600 meters, not to 5, to 400 meters. Only then did they open fire. Not with machine guns, with rifles. German Lieutenant Erwin Rommel, still a junior officer at the time, observed the attack and later wrote, "The first ranks went down as if they had been mowed. I assumed it was machine guns, but the sound was different. Not bursts, single shots. These were rifles. Within 5 minutes, the attack collapsed. The Germans fell back, leaving nearly 300 dead and wounded in front of the American positions. At 9 a.m., they tried again. This time they adapted. Open order, short rushes from tree to tree. Every lesson learned from the morning defeat. But the Americans adapted too. They didn't fire at areas. They fired at figures. When a German soldier broke cover to run, he had 1 second. 2 at most. In that time, an American rifleman aimed and fired. The second attack failed, then the third, then the fourth. By evening, the Germans had launched 6 assaults. Not one reached the American line. German losses exceeded 1,200 men. American losses 19 killed, 63 wounded. Captain John Thompson of the Marine Corps wrote in his report, "Our boys were firing calmly, no shouting, no fuss. Target, shot, reload, next target." As if on the range. By the next day, the German command called off the offensive in this sector. They understood something fundamental. A breakthrough here was impossible. Not against an enemy that had turned accurate shooting into a system. But for the German High Command, this wasn't just a tactical setback. It was a statistical anomaly. And anomalies demand explanations. So they began to count. By July 1918, German headquarters could no longer ignore the pattern. This wasn't bad luck. It wasn't isolated units. And it certainly wasn't propaganda. At the headquarters of the German 18th Army, reports were spread across a long table. Every sector where German units had clashed with American forces. The conclusion was unsettling. In comparable positions, German losses against the Americans were 30 to 40% higher than losses against the French or the British. General Oskar von Hütter ordered a detailed analysis. First conclusion, American artillery was no better than German artillery. Second, American tanks were only beginning to appear and posed no decisive threat. Third, American tactics showed nothing revolutionary. They attacked in waves, just like everyone else. And yet, something was killing German soldiers faster. The analysts focused on rifle fire. They calculated fire density. An average American infantry platoon, 36 men, could deliver up to 150 aim shots per minute. A German platoon of the same size, 60 to 70. A British platoon, about 50. This wasn't about reloading speed. The Springfield wasn't faster than the Mauser. The difference was how many shots hit. German instructors ran their own tests. Distance, 300 meters. Target, moving. Time limit, 30 seconds. 5 shots. Average German accuracy, 20 to 25%. Then they compared it with data from American training camps, documents obtained through neutral countries and intelligence channels. American accuracy in the same test, 60 to 65%, 2.5 times higher. Von Hütter's report to the Supreme Command was blunt. American infantry possesses marksmanship exceeding the standards of all armies on this front. They do not merely shoot, they hit. The document was dated July 18, 1918. Less than 4 months remained until the end of the war. There was no time to change Germany's training system. But the realization had already landed. Germany hadn't just lost in resources, it had lost in quality. And that quality was about to be tested on the largest battlefield the American army had ever seen. The place the Germans called a meat grinder. Meuse-Argonne. September 26, 1918. The Meuse-Argonne offensive begins. It is the largest battle in the history of the United States Army up to that moment. More than 1.2 million American soldiers face 42 German divisions across a front 35 kilometers wide. The terrain is nightmarish. Dense forests, ravines, steep hills, defensive positions built over 4 years. 5 German defensive lines, each layered with barbed wire, machine gun nests, and permanent strongpoints. The Germans consider this sector impenetrable. General John Pershing knows the cost will be horrific. This will not be a clean breakthrough. It will be attrition. But Pershing believes in one thing absolutely: the training. At 5:30 a.m., after 3 hours of artillery preparation, 9 American divisions move forward. German machine guns open fire. For a moment, it looks like the Western Front all over again. Men falling, lines stalling, smoke choking the forest. Then something different happens. In the Argonne Forest, the 77th Division advances where artillery is almost useless. Visibility is too limited, the risk of friendly fire too high. Instead of attacking in dense waves, American riflemen seep forward. Small groups of 5 to 7 men, short rushes, every tree used as cover. Halt, aim, fire, shift position, forward again. German machine gunners, well dug in, protected, confident, begin to fall, not to shells, to single shots, one by one. On October 8, 1918, this system produces its most famous example, a corporal from Tennessee, a hunter, a man who had been shooting since childhood. Alvin York. York and 16 other men run into a German machine gun position, 35 machine guns, over 100 German soldiers. Standard procedure says, withdraw. Call artillery. York does not. He takes position behind a fallen tree. Distance, roughly 230 meters. He begins to fire. Not quickly, not wildly. Methodically, one shot, one German soldier, those who stand to give orders, those who try to move a gun. In 20 minutes, York kills 28 men. The German commander, Lieutenant Paul Wollmer, stands up and surrenders. Behind him, 92 soldiers lay down their weapons. A detachment of 17 Americans captures an entire position. York receives the Medal of Honor. But the point is not that York is unique. The point is that he is a concentrated example of the system. The Meuse-Argonne battle lasts 47 days. American losses are staggering, 277 killed, more than 95,000 wounded. German losses are even higher, around 120,000. And more importantly, Germany loses its last major defensive line before the homeland itself. French Marshal Ferdinand Foch, Supreme Commander of Allied forces, writes to Pershing, "Your soldiers do not merely fight, they change the balance of power." Each American rifleman is worth 2 German soldiers, not because he is braver, but because he is more accurate. But accuracy does more than kill. It changes what happens inside a soldier's mind. And that the Americans would only understand after the war. When the guns finally fell silent in November 1918, the Western Front disappeared almost overnight. Trenches collapsed. Wire was cut away. Armies went home. But the analysis had only just begun. For the German High Command, defeat could not be explained by numbers alone, nor by technology, nor by strategy. So they studied details. In 1921, German officers gained access to copies of American training documents, some through neutral countries, others through international disarmament commissions. Among them was the Rifle Training Manual 1917. Colonel Ludwig Beck, head of training for the post-war German Army, studied the manual for a full week. Then he wrote a 72-page report. His conclusion was direct and painful. America had surpassed Germany not in grand strategy and not in weapons, but in individual training. The average American soldier was a better marksman than the average German soldier. And that advantage compounded. If each soldier is even 20% more effective, the unit becomes dramatically stronger as a whole. Beck recommended sweeping reforms, more time devoted to shooting drills, mandatory firing on the move. Less emphasis on parade ground perfection, more on individual mastery, but Germany had no means to implement them. The Versailles Treaty restricted the army to 100,000 men and strictly limited ammunition. Training cartridges were counted like gold. By contrast, in 1918, the United States spent over 200 million rounds per year on training alone. Germany remembered the lesson, but too late to act on it. Meanwhile, the Americans were learning something unexpected about their own soldiers. In 1922, Army psychiatrist Thomas Salmon published a study on stress and combat efficiency. He compared veterans trained under the American marksmanship system with those trained under traditional European methods. The result was striking. American veterans showed significantly fewer symptoms of what would later be called post-traumatic stress, not because they had seen less horror, but because they had felt more control in battle. Salmon wrote, "A skill driven to the level of automatism becomes a form of protection. When consciousness is overwhelmed by chaos, the body still knows what to do." It was stabilizing. Before the war, armies believed discipline and obedience were enough. The Americans added something new: competence. A soldier who knows he can hit does not wait for constant orders. He acts, he decides, he moves. German soldiers were models of discipline. The French were masters of endurance. The British excelled in organization. But American soldiers became dangerous through independence, an independence born from mastery. They did not spray bullets. They aimed. They did not wait to be told every move. They recognized targets and acted. That was not chaos, it was confidence. And confidence, multiplied across an entire army, changed the balance of power. So when German soldiers later tried to explain why the Americans attacked so quickly, why they advanced under fire, why they didn't break like expected, the answer was never found in tanks or tactics. It was found on the range, in repetition, in habit, in a system that turned ordinary men into riflemen. The Germans didn't understand it at first. By the time they did, the war was already lost.